I'm Aisha. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
I'm very honored to be kicking off this program this year, the Age of India, but also the larger India program that UCF is launching. I don't think it could be more timely. As you just heard, the set of international circumstances that our country is facing at this point in time is very complex. We're about to elect a new president that will have to deal with a host of very critical issues, starting from the financial crisis that our representatives are contemplating what to do about right now, to the war on terror, to climate change, to the situation in the Middle East, and all the rest of it. And our relationship with this rising Asian giant, India, I think will be an increasingly important relationship in how we are able to confront this very complex and wide set of global challenges that we are going to be facing in the coming years. And as students at the university, how many in the audience are students here? Okay, so really most of you in the audience, you know, this is the world that you, when you finish your degree at UCF, are going to go out and you know, need to deal with, not only in terms of furthering your own private goals, but also in terms, I hope, of making a contribution with the education you've received here. And the more that students here at this university and across the country can come to know and understand what is at stake in the rise of a nation like India, a democracy of 1.2 billion people, at a time of a changing and uncertain world order and resource scarcity, and at a time when global warming is threatening to really kick in, is something that I think is absolutely crucial. And not only crucial so that we can deal with these challenges in terms of blunting their effects, if you will, but also because I think there are a lot of opportunities in these challenges. And discovering those opportunities is going to be, you know, really how we're going to find our way out of some of the things that are threatening us. And just in terms of what I've learned of some of the core areas of research at this university, I was struck by how many of them are areas of specific research where partnerships with India can really result in some synergistic outcomes that would be beneficial, not just for the university, but also for our country and for the country of India. So again, I think it's incredibly timely initiative on your part, and I'm honored to be kicking it off. I wrote this book because I've been going to India, well, just about since the time your president was a Danforth Fellow, 1960. Practically my whole life, and I certainly was aware of some of the ways that India and the world was changing over those 40 plus years, but it became apparent in the last 5 to 10 years that that pace of change was accelerating dramatically. And there was a lot of reporting in the US press, especially in the business press, sort of, you know, Business Week magazine cover stories about India's rise as an emerging economic power. But I felt that the coverage was fairly unidimensional and did not get at the larger and deeper questions of, one, what does it mean for a nation of that size, of 1.2 billion people, which is a developing country in which most of the people are still very poor, but some of the people are very rich, and many of the people have a lifestyle comparable to the lifestyle of most middle-class people in this city or any city across the United States. But what does it mean for a country of that dimension to experience a growth rate of between 6 and 9%? What does that feel like to grow that fast and to be transforming that quickly? What does it feel like to go through all three of the major revolutions, I'm talking about economic revolutions, that Western society took centuries to go through. What are those revolutions? The Industrial Revolution of the 18th, 19th centuries, and then the information technology revolution and the services revolution. All of those revolutions, India is going through at once. It's rapidly expanding its manufacturing capacity right now, sort of doing the 19th century thing that, say, happened in England at that time, with massive dislocations of people from an agrarian, rural lifestyle, now moving into cities, into an urban lifestyle. Of course, the information technology revolution is something that most of you are probably familiar with if you're not actually engaged in it, or even if you've just made a call to ask about a credit card issue or some problem with your computer, you've been engaged in it because you might very likely have spoken to a young man or woman in an Indian call center to deal with your problem. So India, on the 21st century cutting edge of the information and communications technology revolution and the services revolution too. What does that feel like, and what does that mean for this ancient civilization, 5,000-year-old civilization, which is also based on 19th century institutions that came out of the European Enlightenment? It has institutions inherited from the British. It has a parliament. It has a system of rule of law that came out of those traditions, which are also very much related to the traditions on which our own country is founded. And then to also be a country that's participating at the cutting edge of all these new technologies, information, communication, and also increasingly biotechnologies. What does that possibly implicate? And the transformations that are happening in India are much more profound than simply more and more people moving into apartment buildings, buying a car or a motor scooter, and being able to consume international brands. It's much, much more profound than that. And at the same time that these very profound and rapid changes are happening in India, they're happening at a particular global moment. They're partly possible because of a particular global moment. I mean, that information technology revolution and the services revolution, which enabled the outsourcing boom to benefit India so much, could only have happened in this particular global moment. But it's also happening in a global moment where we are facing collectively a series of very daunting challenges, the most important of which is certainly climate change, which we are just starting to feel the effects of, but which all the scientific research and the latest major reports out of the United Nations, the Stern report and other reports indicate are going to have an increasingly profound impact on our lives, whether it's, here we are in Florida, whether it's an increased incidence of major hurricanes, or whether it's droughts in other areas, whether it's water sources drying up, or shifting, rivers shifting. All of these things are going to have a profound influence as temperatures rise. And the major impact of climate change is going to be felt in the developing world. I mean, really, basically, the closer you are to the equator, the more you're going to experience that, and most of the developing nations across Asia and Africa and South America are located on that part of the planet. The Peterson Institute released a book in April of this year on the predicted impact of climate change on global agricultural production, which I think is one of the most important books to come out this year, and which has very profound implications for India's and all of our future. And in that book, it is predicted that India's agricultural production will decline by 38% between now and 2080 as a direct result of climate change. And that's during the same period of time that India will add 450 million more people to its population. So that alone is a very daunting challenge. Water and water scarcity. That's a problem that is something that's being acutely felt in certain parts of the United States. Some of you might recall that Atlanta was just about to lose its last drop of water last summer. Problems in the southwestern parts of the United States. Well, India has 18% of the world's population and only 4% of the world's fresh water. As industrial agriculture is moving into India more and more, water demand in rural areas is going up, and with the growth in the cities and greater consumer demand in the cities, water demand in the cities is also going up. So water is a critical issue in India. Energy. I'm not sure what it's doing today, but I think oil went up by another record amount yesterday, $5 or something in a single day. I'm sure all of you here in Orlando, I get the impression that the basic way that people get around this city is in cars. So probably all of you are very conscious of the price you're paying at the pump for gasoline as oil prices go up. Well, in India, if you have, imagine, we have this advanced economy, okay, and we have certain energy needs, but imagine if you have 4 times the population of the United States and an economy growing at 8 or 9%, and you're developing really rapidly, putting in new infrastructure, creating new demand. So people are buying cars like never before. They're actually increasing the amount of cars they're buying there, buying computers, buying air conditioners, buying refrigerators, buying washing machines for the first time. So those markets are exploding. So the energy demand is also exploding. This is a major challenge for India, is how to meet the energy demand from this accelerated growth in an era when energy is becoming a scarce commodity. Terrorism, that's something we're very conscious of in the United States. I think the alert right now at the airports is orange. Well, India between 2004 and 2007, according to the United States Counterterrorism Agency, had 3,674 victims, civilian victims of terrorist attacks. That's a number greater than the number of people who died in Iraq from terrorist attacks during the same time period. And since that report was published, there have been a series of terrorist attacks in India this year, on Ahmedabad, on Bangalore, on Jaipur, and most recently in New Delhi. So terrorism is a problem that India is facing. We heard from our president a few years ago that it was important for us to go into Iraq because we needed to take the war on terror over there so they wouldn't attack us here. Well, India just happens to be located pretty close to over there. And so that war on terror, I mean, when we read about Afghanistan in the news, we realize that it's something that is very important for our country's national security, what's happening there. Well, imagine if you were one country away from Afghanistan, and that country was Pakistan, which has its own set of very challenging domestic, political, and economic situations going on right now. So India is really sort of on the front lines of that whole situation, and that's another challenge that it's facing. And the final challenge that I'll mention, there are more, but I think this one is very important, and that is the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And whereas India's economy has been able to enrich a certain number of people, there are about 50 million people in India who live very, very well, double income people in Bangalore who both work for high-tech companies or something, who are making $5,000 to $10,000 a month in salary, and can afford to go shopping at the malls and buy cars and all the rest. And there are another 200 to 300 million, depending on how you measure it, middle-class people who have disposable income that they can spend on things other than essentials. But there are more than 40% of Indians who live below the World Bank's just published new poverty threshold of $1.25 a day. So that means in 1.2 billion people, there are about 500 million people who are living on less than $1.25 a day. And many of those people simply do not have the education or the skills to enable them to get involved in the economic growth that's going on and really benefit from it. They just don't have the skills that India's own companies, much less foreign companies that are investing in India, require, not just in the high-level information technology companies, but even on the factory floor. If you're illiterate, you can't read the sign that says, watch out, don't stick your hand in here, you're in trouble. So basic literacy skills, and that is a big challenge. But this wealth gap is not a problem that's unique to India. This is a problem that is being exacerbated across Asia and around the world. The Asian Development Bank published a report earlier this year that the wealth gap is growing in every single Asian country except Malaysia. Anybody here a Malaysia expert? Because I don't understand why Malaysia is the exception. No one? Okay, well, I don't know what Malaysia is doing right, but Malaysia, according to the Asian Development Bank, is the only country in Asia where the wealth gap isn't growing. Now, I hope as I've listed this series of daunting challenges that India is facing as it embarks on this incredible project to transform itself from a developing country to a developed country in record time, I hope that you've been thinking, well, these aren't Indian problems. These are problems we're facing here in the United States. These are global problems, because they are. Not a single one of the problems that I just listed is unique to India. They're problems that we're facing in the United States that are being faced across the world. And so in my book, I have profiled a certain number of incredible individuals, nonprofit organizations, and business leaders who are doing amazingly inventive things to deal with these problems, but to do so in a way that is market-oriented and market-viable, because that's the economic reality within which we function in this world. It's as true in India as it is here. And you know, these people are really sort of thinking outside the box and finding really new solutions to deal with these problems. And that's what's required to get us through this, a kind of innovation and a kind of you know, willingness to let go of received ideas and to think of really radically new ideas to address these problems. Is the kind of thing that I think there's an unlimited potential to ratchet up in the India-US relationship. I mean, innovation is something that historically the United States has been extremely good at. Entrepreneurship is something that we've been historically very good at in the United States. And there are unlimited, literally unlimited opportunities to find the silver lining in the clouds that I just mentioned, to do what my mother always told me: if life hands you a bowl of lemons, well, figure out a way to make lemonade. And you know, we're in a certain sense, looking around the world right now, looking at a whole lot of lemons. And you know, our task as citizens of this world, and your task as students who will be shaping our future, is to figure out how to make those lemons into lemonade. It really is. And there's a lot of potential to do that in the India-US relationship. The other way that India is having a major impact is on the level of something that has lately not been as valued as it should be in the United States, and that's something called soft power. Any political science students in the room who know this expression, soft power? One? Are you a student? Okay, good. Two? Okay. Well, soft power is a term that was coined by Joseph Nye, who's a political scientist at Harvard and wrote a book about soft power. Soft power, as opposed to hard power, we know what that is. It's do what we want you to do, or we'll bomb you, or you know, wrap you on the head. It's the exercise of force to get what you want. Soft power is how you get people to want to do what you want them to do, so that maybe they don't even realize they're wanting to do the same thing you want them to do. And soft power derives from two different sources. It derives, according to Joseph Nye, it derives from cultural assets, and it derives from moral institutional assets. So that in the United States, where we have considerable soft power assets, and we had perhaps more of those assets in the bank a few years ago than we do now, that our soft power would derive not only from the attractiveness of American culture. I mean, there's really no place you can go in the world and not see a Hollywood movie, or a McDonald's restaurant, or a pair of Levi's for sale, listen to American rock music at a higher level, see American abstract art and museums, or all the rest of it, right? But it also derives from the fact that we have a certain moral authority because we are a democracy. And so that, in some sense, even if the specific actions that we take may be perceived as being misguided or wrong, at some level, we are acting with the moral authority of being a democracy. And these are attributes that India shares with us. They also have the moral authority of being a democracy. They're the largest democracy in the world. Every single election that takes place in India is the biggest election that has ever taken place. More than 500 million people go to the polls there every year. So it's definitely democracy, and they have a whole range of political parties and regional parties, and it's much more complex political terrain than we have here. And then it is also a country with tremendous cultural assets. And those cultural assets are not only the traditional arts, you know, classical Indian music and dance, the ancient architecture, sculpture that some of you may be familiar with, but also in this age of the media, where, you know, as Marshall McLuhan said, the media is the message. We very much live in a highly mediatized global environment. Indian popular culture is an immense soft power asset that India has. We were talking earlier about the popularity of Indian films and movie stars all over the world. From, I understand that Bollywood movies, how many of you have seen a Bollywood movie? Okay, about half of you. Well, if you haven't, go rent one and go see them because they're a lot of fun. Bollywood movies are the most popular kind of movie in Peru. I mean, who would think, a South American nation on the Pacific coast, that they would have Bollywood movies be the most popular movies? One of the people at lunch was telling me an anecdote about hearing one of India's most famous actors, Amitabh Bachchan's voice from the basement of a home in a little village in rural Morocco. Raj Kapoor is still revered, a classic Indian actor from the 40s and 50s, still revered in Russia. So across the world, Bollywood movies are something that are very popular. Indian popular music and the fusion music that's coming out of the London Underground and out of New York, where I live, where there's basement bhangra every night at SOBs, for example, so that you have the sort of second generation of Indian and other South Asian immigrants, the kids who are born in London or born in the US, who are creating their own new music and who are fusing that with hip hop or other kinds of rock and popular music and creating just a whole new thing. Fashion, of course, India has been a source of textiles for 5,000 years. There are scraps of Indian textiles found in the pyramids of Egypt. That goes way, way back. The British, one of their major interests in India, of course, at first was textiles. So that's an old story, and there's still a lot of textiles that are sourced out of India. I live in New York City, and I guarantee you that in the fashion district of New York City, the number of people who are having all their garments made in India, and even at the very highest designer all the embroidery, all the really luxurious fabrics, and especially labor-intensive things, sequining of gowns, all of that is done in India. So the fashion thing, but you also have Indian designers now that have become international design figures, and whose work is on view in Milan or Paris or New York all the time. So in any of these things, Indian cuisine, I remember when I was growing up in the United States in the 60s and 70s, even in the 80s, you really couldn't find Indian groceries anywhere. Now you can go into any supermarket, I'm sure it's true in Orlando, if I'm wrong, someone raise their hand, and find in their frozen food section Indian dishes in the frozen food section. I mean, it's really been an amazing thing, and I bet do you have any good Indian restaurants here? Yes. Yeah, okay. So, and that's true across the United States, and 20 years ago that wasn't true. So that's something, and that's true around the world as well. This year, related to my book, I have traveled to Australia, Brazil, Italy, and France. These are for different editions of the book. And I have to tell you that this interest in India really is global. It's not just here in the United States. People around the world are interested by India's rise, and India has come to their attention. But here's what's different, and it's different even from the United Kingdom, where there's also a large Indian immigrant population. There's a very different history there, obviously. What's different is you don't have the immigrant community that you do here of people from India. And now more than 2 million American residents and citizens of Indian origin in this country. And it's a group that has grown not only in numbers, but also in economic clout and in political clout. Both of these campaigns have senior advisors who are from this community. One almost had a vice presidential candidate from this community, as if I recall. I'll just say outright, I'm on the Obama side, and Preeta Bansal, former Solicitor General of the state of New York, is chairing the South Asians for Obama thing. I'm going to Chicago to a women's leadership thing in which a whole delegation of South Asian women leaders will be attending. So very involved in politics, also running for local office. Do you have any local city or state officials who are of Indian origin in Florida? No? Okay, but increasingly across the country there are. There are people who are getting involved in the political process, running for office. This is just going to have a tremendous impact. And then you have the involvement of the Indian immigrant community in key industry sectors of the United States, especially in information technology.
And that has really had a profound impact on the relationship between the two countries. I think it's had the most profound impact of anything in recent years. You have that Silicon India in Silicon Valley and connecting to the Silicon India in Hyderabad and Bangalore in India. And you have people who've made their fortunes by launching companies in Silicon Valley, who've then taken some of that money, invested it in India, who maybe have relocated to India, or maybe they just are on an airplane between the two countries so much they might as well call, you know, Delta or United their home. But the ties in that sector alone are just phenomenal. India last year was the #1 destination for venture capital behind the, ahead of the United States. That's changed this year. I think China's the #1 destination this year, and the US, I think, edged a little bit above India. But nonetheless, India is one of the biggest destinations for US-based venture capital, which I think also says a lot on the way that the investor community in this country is betting on what's happening in India. Another way that India is really unique and that will have a profound impact on planet India, or on the age of India, as you're calling it here, is India's demographics. India has what's known as the demographic dividend. I've mentioned this number a couple of times now, of 1.2 billion people, that it will increase until India reaches a population of 1.6 billion people. Well, today, half of those 1.2 billion people are under the age of 25. That's 600 million people under the age of 25. And what does that mean? That means a couple of things. It's a glass half full, half empty story, like a lot of India's story right now. The glass half full part of the story is it's a tremendous market, right? I mean, I have a teenage son and daughter, and I can tell you they want to buy a lot more stuff than I want to buy. They know, like, the latest phones that have come out. I mean, Mom, your phone's so old, why don't you change it? I say, it works fine. You know, that's just not something they understand. They know the latest style of jeans. I mean, this is your market, the market tranche that is every marketer's dream is 14 to 25. Well, India's got a lot of those people. So they've got a huge potential market that's just still barely been tapped. It's also potentially a low-cost labor core of immense proportion. If India can meet another of its challenges, which is basic education, and get more of its young people educated, not just literate, but with even some basic skill sets in math, science, and other basic skills, then it really has a phenomenal labor force to offer. And naturally, that will be at wage rates probably lower than those in the United States for some time to come. So that's another way that India's demographic dividend is potentially a huge asset for India. I've said in other presentations, and I said at lunch, that what that means when you project forward is that, you know, when the Europeans, who have a very aging population, or I suppose I put the Japanese in with them, are on cryogenic, you know, freezer situations waiting for the miracle to happen to bring them back. And Americans are all, you know, doddering in old age homes, and the Chinese are going around with canes. Well, the Indians will be at the disco. And that's really sort of a way to understand what that demographic dividend means. It means that the productive population in India and the consuming population in India is not only huge, but will remain so much longer than it will in most of the rest of the world. Now, the glass half empty side of that is this. With this recent economic growth and the rapid transformations, especially in urban India, the putting in of new roads, the shopping malls, all these signs of India being a much more prosperous society, and of India accepting, I would say with gusto, a consumer culture, consumer basis for its economy and culture. India has kindled a lot of aspiration, a lot of ambition, and a lot of hope on the part of its young people that, wow, I could buy that. I could live like that. You know, I could get that stuff. I could be like that person on television. Now, India's challenge is to deliver real opportunities to those kids. It has to create something like 500 million jobs in the next few years to give these young people
a job where they can make enough of a living to have the purchasing power to actually participate actively in the consumer culture that's now being dangled in front of them. This is a very big challenge because globalization, as it has been unfolding, and as we know even here in the United States, has been very good at generating capital. It has been less good at creating jobs. So, I mean, there's been displacement of jobs, but there hasn't necessarily been job creation. And so in India, the last thing India needs is to increase efficiency if that means reducing man hours. India needs man hours. India needs to have people put to work. So this is a real challenge for India, to find ways to keep the growth number up, which usually is achieved by greater efficiencies, right? But yet to employ more and more people, to really employ a number of people that is historically very daunting. Another of India's challenges, which is a global challenge as well, but is particularly acute in India, is, you know, if you think about those three revolutions that I mentioned and the transformation of Western society, European and American society, over a 300-year period, from an agrarian-based society to a highly industrialized and now to a post-industrial society. There was a lot of friction over those years. There were wars. There were revolutions. Tens of millions of people died. The global depression in the 1930s gave birth to World War II. Okay? And now India is attempting to go through all of that in a mere few decades. And there is friction in India. There is contestation. There are losers with the winners. One example is to expand its manufacturing base. India is very aggressively creating what are called special economic zones and expropriating farmland from peasant farmers. These peasant farmers don't really have any other skills because they've never been able to get an education. They're often not paid an adequate amount for their land. They then resent that, and there were very violent confrontations earlier this year in the state of West Bengal in Nandigram, where the state had given 30,000 acres or so to an Indonesian chemical plant to set up shop. The farmers were very upset that their very fertile land was being taken away. And you had a situation that is probably unique in a democracy of the Communist Party, parens Marxist, of West Bengal. That's the party in power in the government, state government there. Their security forces in armed combat with the Naxal Maoist rebels who had taken the part of the farmers. And the Naxal movement is growing at 20,000 people under arms in uniform, and they are growing in influence, and their popularity and their power is being fed by a development process which is disenfranchising especially very poor peasants in rural areas and what are called in India tribals or advasis, who live in forested areas, which no one was really interested in until they found a lot of iron ore and other minerals under there. It's a very old story. We've been through this with our native people, certainly the silver mines in South America. I mean, this is a very old story, and it's happening in India. And we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, this has been the historical process. But a challenge for India as a democracy to deal with that. In India, it's the poor who vote. And in any case, they're the majority of the voters. And so the government is always finding itself in a situation where it needs to have policies that on the one hand attract the kind of investment and create an investment climate where India's own companies and foreign companies and capital will want to invest in India because they need that economic growth. On the other hand, they have to show that they are cognizant of the real suffering of many of India's people. So I'm just going to conclude because I think my time even may be a minute or two over, and I would like to give you all an opportunity to ask me questions. But this year, I've really focused my work on the global food and agricultural crisis. And this is something that is a major issue in India. I mentioned the impact of climate change on agriculture. The United States and India have a very complicated past with regard to agriculture as an issue between the two countries. We now have an India-US Agricultural Knowledge Initiative that has some positive aspects and, in my view, has some very negative aspects. But one of the major challenges that India is facing and that we are also facing is to figure out a way to feed the world's population that doesn't destroy the environment that we need to support the plants that are the agriculture to feed the world's population. Right now, we've figured out how to produce large amounts of food in industrial, agricultural settings where we pump in, we basically have these plants on artificial life support. We pump in tons of inputs, chemical fertilizers, which derive from natural gas, so that's a problem because we're in a scarcity situation, and massive applications of pesticides. And we have a dead zone in our Gulf of Mexico and our Chesapeake Bay that are growing. We have pollution of our own underground aquifers in the Midwest from pesticide and nitrate runoff. I'm a little bit familiar with the situation in Florida with the sugar industry in the Everglades, but not too much. But I mean, this goes across the board, across the United States. India is looking at following that agricultural industrial model more and more. I think it will be a big mistake, but it's very legitimate to raise the question, well, hey, at least that can produce the food, show me another way to do it. And that is a real challenge. And it's these kinds of thinking outside the box challenges that I'll conclude by laying before, especially the students who are in the room. We need to find solutions that go beyond the same old, because the same old isn't sustainable. We have to find ways to deal with these problems, especially, I think that's critical in democracies, that can provide solutions that are both sustainable and also equitable. Because if these solutions only benefit a small part of the population, then it's still not going to work, and it especially can't work in a democracy. I mean, we have got to have something that gives people the sense that every person has the possibility to realize their full human potential if they do the right things, if they work hard, if they get that education, that they will be able to have a decent life. These are issues that we're debating right now in this presidential election here in the United States, and they're also critical issues in India. So those are the challenges that I put before you. Those are the challenges of the age of India. It's a very exciting time because these breakthroughs, when they are made, and there are already all kinds of examples of things that haven't yet been scaled up that are very exciting, are going to create enormous opportunities for the countries that seize upon them, for the companies that take the initiative on them, and they will move into leadership positions. So the opportunities are really immense, and it's a very exciting time to be a young person, actually, I think, going in and looking at dealing with these things. I'm going to just stop by reading something at the conclusion of my book, and then I'll open it up for questions. I end the book with this statement: another world is possible. Will India fulfill the promise of this moment and make good on the pledge Jawaharlal Nehru made to the people of India in his famous speech at the hour of his country's independence, to free all Indians from, quote, poverty and disease and inequality of opportunity, end quote? Will India have the political courage and the intellectual daring to imagine a post-industrial 21st century national destiny grounded in its own ancient traditions and the truly revolutionary message of nonviolence that secured its freedom? The sheer vitality of India's people, the magic of its rich culture, both ancient and contemporary, are wellsprings of creativity and resilience which inspire and sustain millions of people in India and around the world every day. There's a sufficient level of chaotic exuberance in every facet of this magnificent country that India will always escape easy generalizations, even, it is my sincerest hope, about the direst tendencies of the current moment. India's political and cultural soft power remain enormous assets that will see the country far toward achieving its goals. The world continues to be just as enchanted with all things Indian as Indians themselves, who revel in the dynamic creative possibilities of their nation as it rushes forward. Still, when rhetoric and reality drift too far apart, even the mightiest soft power can lose its potency, and the credibility of even the greatest nation can be lost. In the end, India's most precious asset of all is its democracy. No matter how high India's growth rate spikes or how many new Indian billionaires make the Forbes list, India's primarily poor voters will turn the current government out if it fails to make meaningful progress toward meeting their basic needs. The head of a powerful lobbying group in Washington, D.C. told me recently, "Business is leading this whole thing now with India. We just need to make sure the governments bring the people along." I hope the coming elections in India and the United States will prove this man has the equation of democratic governance turned on its head. Will a new U.S. administration have the courage to radically refocus the relationship between the United States and India around the major challenges of our time? It will if American citizens, including Indian American citizens, demand that it does. Imagine the power of a bilateral relationship between two of the world's great democracies, focused on promoting sustainable agriculture that preserves family farms and plant diversity, on tackling global warming by dramatically reducing greenhouse gases, bringing down America's disproportionate consumption of world resources, and making concrete plans to help citizens and businesses cope with what climate change is likely to inflict, on designing low-cost, environmentally friendly, and energy-efficient housing and transportation, on investing in preventative medicine and using technology to bring down healthcare costs to make excellent healthcare a universal right and not a limited privilege, on making quality education accessible to all so that every child can realize his or her full life potential. Imagine a U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement that focuses on universal nuclear disarmament, something even Henry Kissinger has called for recently, including that of the United States, something India has advocated for many years, and on finding alternative energy sources sufficient to allow us to forego both fossil fuels and fissile fuels. Another world is possible. As many of the people interviewed in this book amply show, we the people need only translate what has already been imagined into reality. India is moving faster and faster, no doubt. We all are. The question is, toward what destiny? Thank you. So I'm very happy to take questions. Yes?
What is being done, what research is being done to regenerate the rice crop that is so important to that cultures on that part of the world? There were so many problems recently with so much rice not being diseased and what have you, and it is so important to that part of the world.
Yeah, and then the cyclone took out the Burmese rice crop, which a lot of countries were counting on. Well, there's a lot of research going on in rice at agricultural universities across this country and Asia. I know I was recently at Punjab Agricultural University in Punjab, which is India's probably most productive agricultural state and where they had their Green Revolution, where the Green Revolution took off. And they're working on species of rice that are consume much lower amounts of water. Rice is traditionally a very water-thirsty crop. And also that can grow well and produce a lot of rice as temperatures rise, so in warmer climate conditions, because they're very conscious that climate change is something that they're going to need to deal with. So there is a lot of research going on. But the challenge of meeting the world's demand for cereal crops is a very big challenge. I mean, there were a number of factors that contributed to the food crisis that we saw earlier this year. There was the cyclone that took out the Burmese rice crop. There was wacky weather all over the world that reduced harvests. There was speculation on the commodity exchanges that put up the price. There's increasing demand for food as people get able to buy more food, which is not a bad thing that they're able to buy more food. I have had people in India saying, you guys are saying it's India's fault we have a food crisis because we want to eat more. That's like an obese person telling a starving man to go on a diet. We throw away more food every day in this country than in India consumes. So there's that too. So there are a number of factors, but there is a lot of research being done. Yes?
One question which I really have, you said there's so much of progress when you went to India, which you mentioned also, but did you see there was a future shock also in the villages and the masses at large? When you're mentioning about you're going to Ahmedabad and other slums, and there is a progress so much in Taj Mahal Hotel, you're mentioning, but there's so much of future shock, that's the reason people are getting crippled. What's your ideas about that?
If I understand your question, there are two things in it. One is the wealth gap, so that there's the luxury of any of the Taj hotels or any of these shopping malls. I mean, there's even a Rolls-Royce dealership now in Bombay. No, I'm not kidding. And there's a Maserati dealership in Delhi, and Louis Vuitton sells more of its products in India than it does in any other single national market. That is a fact. So the rich in India have a lot of money and they're spending it. But then you have the poor. And so this is a real problem. I think I highlighted that in my remarks. The future shock, if I'm not sure what you mean by that, but there is a future shock in the sense that you have in this, creative destruction as part of capitalism, right? Part of this change. In this creative part, the destructive part is you have basically people who are part of an ancient agrarian society who are, in some cases, literally being ripped out of their traditional villages and lands. India has a large number of internal migrants, literally hundreds of millions of internal migrants of these peasants who can no longer survive in their rural context. And they're basically a mobile, dirt cheap labor pool for construction. Any of you who've been to India, you've seen the skyscrapers going up. Well, who's building them? You have women in completely traditional village outfits carrying cement and baskets on their head. These are women who, 5 years ago were living in their village milking their water buffalo, okay? So that kind of future shock, you have people who are are experiencing what peasant farmers in England experienced in the 19th century, the sort of Charles Dickens novels of London and its horrible conditions, and people who'd moved from farms to that with child labor and all the rest of it, right? But you have people who are experiencing that very rapidly on a large scale. So this agrarian, industrial, post-industrial thing that's happening very fast, that's the future shock, I think. Yeah. It's having a profound effect. And one of the effects is the growth of the politicization of religion in India. There's religion, but there's also the way that politicians in India can use religion. And that's something that is of great concern. You have elections in India that will be coming up. It's quite possible that the BJP will be elected back into power, the Hindu Nationalist Party. How they will manage this time around, that issue remains to be seen. And then you have, as there's a scrambling for scarcer and scarcer resources among the poor, you have a lot of tensions that is just, I recently wrote a piece for World Policy Journal that's forthcoming this winter in our 25th anniversary issue on India in 2033. And it's like in California when you're waiting for the big one, the earthquake, you have some little tremors and some shocks, and that releases some tension. You have a riot here or something there, but no one knows when the big one is going to hit. And as we saw recently, someone like Raj Thakare in Bombay in the Shiv Sena party is very willing to finger poor migrant workers from India's poorest states, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, who've dared to come to Bombay to try to survive and make a living, and set the Maharashtrian youth against them, that it's all their fault, all of Bombay's problem. This kind of thing is another part of the future shock that I think is potentially explosive. Yeah. Okay.
With the 600 million people that you're talking about under the age of 25 and their demands for, new technologies and new cars and everything like that, what do you think those demands from the 600 million people are going to do to our time frame to create world and life-sustaining technologies?
Well, first of all, there's no way that China and India can have a U.S. level of consumption, because by the time they get there, there won't be any oil, steel, or anything else left. So there's just no way that they can drive around in SUVs and have the level of consumption that we have. Now, let me remind everyone that about something I hope you already know, and that is that with 6% of the world's population, we consume 30% of the world's resources. India and China can't also consume 30% of the world's resources. That makes 90%. There's a few other people left out there. So that just is not going to happen. And my hope is that, and the question is, will it happen fast enough in terms of global warming? But I think that the tendency now really is toward much more efficient cars that don't consume gasoline at all or consume very small amounts of it. The nano car that Tata is producing, the world's cheapest car, which I wrote an op-ed about in the Washington Post, which the editor is entitled, "It's cute as a bug, costs $2,500 and could mean global disaster." You never get to write the headline, just remember that when you're writing an op-ed for the Washington Post. But putting that many more cars on India's overloaded roads is not necessarily a great idea. On the other hand, better a car like that than a Cadillac SUV, in terms of what it consumes. And Tata Motors just signed an agreement with a French company that has perfected a technology to make cars move on compressed air technology. And they're going to try to make their goal is to make the Nano be the first post-petrol, post-gasoline car. So then that suddenly changes everything, doesn't it? You think, oh, putting all these cars on the road, that's terrible. They can't do that. They're going to bring us all down with global warming, and there's not enough oil. But suddenly, if you take oil out of the picture, well, things look a little different. You know, you even have a company like General Motors here in this country that had an electric car, took it out of the market. They're putting it back in. You know, so there are things that are happening. I was at a conference in France in June where the head of Renault spoke, and he said, hey, we could have had electric cars on the road 20 years ago. We have the technology. It's not a problem. But the regulatory environment gave us no incentive to do it. Why should we spend money investing in this? It's going to cost us money. We can keep pumping out the gasoline cars and the diesel cars that we do and make our quarterly profits. He said, it's our responsibility as companies to make products and make money. It's your responsibility, governments and citizens, to put in the regulatory framework that makes what we do, respect these goals that we may all have. So, one of the things that's been lacking in this country, frankly, on that note, is a regulatory environment to really push Detroit to move forward and produce more really energy-efficient cars, something that they have been perfectly capable of doing for a long time. And look what's happened. The U.S. automotive industry is one of the least competitive industries in the world now. The Japanese, I mean, how many of you own a non-U.S. car? Right, okay? So there you go. And that's right in this country. So it's actually put us at a competitive disadvantage. So that's certainly something that we need to do, is make sure as citizens that we demand of our government, and we're going to have a new one way or another, that we start to put in the regulatory frameworks and enact the policies that will help industry to create these new things that we need to create. Yes. She's got a microphone for you.
How can India get help from this carbon credit concept that's been getting very popular around the world now?
Oh, well, I mean, India is obviously eligible for the carbon offsets. So the European Union has moved forward much more aggressively on that front than we have, although they've had some problems with that recently. The World Bank just gave Tata, I mean, they're such a big company, they come up all the time, but a huge grant to build a coal-fired plant that the single plant, produce more carbon than the entire country of Algeria. So, again, great if India can benefit from some carbon offsets, but also maybe taking that grant from the World Bank and putting it into a clean coal technology effort, because we all know that coal is the way India is going to get a lot of its electricity for a while, just as coal is the major way we get it here. Let's admit to it. So we're not going to just suddenly shift from coal to non-coal. We can't do that. We got to, like a Titanic of an economy, right? But what we can do is at least make that coal much less of a carbon-generating thing. I don't know where the mic goes. Okay.
Well, you've characterized the large population of India in terms of a half-full or half-empty situation. But it seems to me that you could consider the large population an issue in itself, in the sense that you need resources for so many people. I mean, presumably and hopefully Chinese-style one-child policy will not work in India, but what can and should be done in this situation?
There's only one thing that works to reduce the birth rate. And by the way, India's birth rate has come down dramatically over the last few decades. The problem is even if you're at 0.1%, if you have 1 billion people, that still adds a few people every year. So India has brought down its birth rate quite dramatically. The only thing that, aside from China's draconian one-child policy, that has been proven to reduce population growth is the improving the status of women. The more educated women are, the more control they have over their lives, the fewer children they have, and the children that they do have are better fed and better educated. That's just a fact. That is the conclusion of decades of development work. And India has some very feisty, very smart women in very powerful positions. And even some that aren't in powerful positions, I can attest from my own family that really exercise a lot of power over their lives. But India also is an extremely patriarchal society in general, and India is not a monolithic place. It has really wide regional variations, and there are states in India in particular where the status of women is extremely low and the birth rate is extremely high. So educating women, giving them power over their lives, power over their fertility, and also giving them a reason to exist other than to have children is the best way to deal with that. So hopefully, as India progresses, that will happen.